Hiring a second shooter can be extremely beneficial to you at a wedding as a lead photographer. But if you want to avoid nightmare situations, there are some big mistakes you cannot afford to make. Hi, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Paige. I am the owner and lead attorney behind The Legal Page. Okay, let's start off with a scenario that I've heard happening time and time again. Let's say that you are looking to recruit a second shooter for your upcoming wedding, so you desire to hire a friend. They have some photography experience, but they don't have their own photography business yet. But you think it's going to be fine because you're going to be there throughout the entire day too. Well, it turned out your friend did not get the photos that you needed them to in the most critical time periods of the day, such as the wedding ceremony and the reception, where they really just kind of dozed off and didn't do what you told them to do. Or even worse, they tried to do it, but nothing was in focus, or it was overexposed or underexposed, which means you really have no photos from them that you can use. If it happened day of and you noticed it, then you're probably frantically trying to be everywhere at once, and you're hiring that second shooter and paying them for really no purpose at all. And if you didn't realize this was happening day of and you're realizing it after the fact when you're culling through their images, then you're kind of just out of luck at that point, because all you really have to give your clients is the photos that you took as the lead photographer. So again, it was a waste of time and a waste of money for you to hire them. Ultimately, there are a few mistakes that come into play when hiring a second shooter that can lead to nightmare situations. And those mistakes are, first, not hiring a professional photographer. Second, you did not make the expectations clear. And third, you didn't have a solid contract in place. So mistake number one, hiring a second shooter that is not a professional photographer and is really just a friend and ultimately should just be your assistant and not your second shooter. Here's the thing. Hiring a family member or a friend sounds like a really great way to have a second shooter on hand, but ultimately it usually never pans out. While you think maybe this may be a good route to save some money, it's actually just going to be a waste of money. Especially for weddings, most people who are brand new to the game have never been in a situation where they are shooting large wedding parties and families are around and reception events are happening. And honestly, just things are happening so quickly throughout the day that they're not used to that. And I don't need to tell you why. That is a whole different ballgame. So if they say they're a photographer, you really need to ask them what actual things they've done as a photographer. What shoots have they done? And have they actually been another second shooter or at least an assistant at a wedding? You absolutely need to look for a second shooter that is a photographer and has experience shooting large events. And most times, you want to ensure that you're hiring a second shooter that actually is a photographer and has a business license, has their own business, and has insurance. Because if something were to go wrong, you want them to really act like a subcontractor to you, whereby they can make a claim against their own insurance company and your client isn't making a claim against yours. When hiring a second shooter, I absolutely suggest that you vet them in some way. This is really the big mistake that I see people doing as wedding photographers. They have no procedure in place for vetting someone who is going to be a paid second shooter for them. First, I suggest getting a gallery of raw images that they have shot at a wedding or event. Not one that they've edited to the moon and back that looks perfect, but on the back end, the raw images are a hot mess. This will give you an idea of the materials that they will provide to you on the memory card after working for you. I would also suggest meeting one-on-one with this second shooter and having a relationship before you actually pay them to work for you. Maybe they want to be an assistant. Maybe you have kind of an internship approach to bringing them on board as a second shooter, where they at least have to assist you at one wedding prior to being a second shooter. This is a good way to make sure that you guys work together well, and also that you can really see the photos that they would give you as a second shooter before that actually happens day of. Also, another good idea is to get some customer reviews from them. What do customers say is their experience working with that second shooter, and what type of imagery are those clients getting from this second shooter? Now, if cost is what is preventing you from hiring a really great professional second shooter who is an actual photographer, here are some tips on how to mitigate that cost. You can trade services with this photographer. Maybe they don't actually need the actual hourly rate pay that you would give them as a second shooter at your wedding. Maybe they actually need branding photos more. This is a really great way to trade services here to mitigate that cost. You could also make the use of a second shooter an upgrade to your actual package that your client is booking. So if they want a second shooter there with you, you are bearing that cost on behalf of the client and not your overhead as the business owner. Mistake number 2, you did not make expectations clear with the second shooter before hiring them. Communication is key whenever you hire someone to represent your company at a wedding or event. We asked our TLP community on Facebook what they do to make the expectations clear with their second shooters, and they gave us some great answers regarding this. One person said that she shares a PDF that is really a second shooter guide for her second shooters that she hires. And in it has poses and very specific photos that she expects them to give her at the end of a wedding day. Another person said that he hires second shooters who are quick on their feet and also have really good customer service. He said that actually getting really good photos wasn't necessarily his first priority because he was doing that as the lead photographer. What he really wanted was someone who was getting those action shots and really candid shots that he wasn't able to get, thereby being really quick on their feet, and also somebody who was working really pleasantly with clients day of. He also said here that when a second shooter is really good at looking at what lens you are using as the lead photographer and making sure that the lens that they have on their camera is something totally different, is a really good type of second shooter to look for. Because here you're always going to get contrasting images. And the reason you hire a second shooter is to have that really wide variety and array of photos in the full image gallery that you're going to give your clients after you edit and deliver their gallery. However you decide to communicate with your second shooter, make sure that you make those expectations known and in writing. That means you need to absolutely have those expectations, of course, in a contract, but sometimes in attachments or continual emails to your second shooters prior to the wedding and event day. You don't just want to tell them once in the contract. You want to tell them time and time again so they really know that that expectation from you and their responsibilities are really important as a second shooter working for your business. Which leads me to the final mistake in our story here today. Mistake number 3, you didn't have a second shooter contract in place. This is literally the most egregious mistake that you can make as a wedding photographer by not having a concrete second shooter contract in place before they work for you. Without a contract, there is no recourse if something goes wrong with your second shooter. It is absolutely then a he said, she said situation. For example, what happens if the second shooter doesn't get the shots that they said they could get and agreed to get? Usually in your contract, you're going to have some type of refund situation happening. You might have already paid them, and so if they didn't get the shots, then they agreed to refund you. Or better yet, you don't make that final payment to your second shooter until you actually see the photos that they are going to give you and you cull through them. That way, if they don't give you the photos that were expected of them, then you only have to give probably a partial amount of that final payment to them. A really good cheat sheet for you is to click on the link below in the description box that says second shooter contract, which will lead you to the legalpage.com and our second shooter contract. On that product page, click on the clauses included tab, and it will have a full list of all of the clauses that you absolutely need to have in your second shooter contract. But to give you a little taste, I wanted to just outline some of the key clauses that you need to have in your second shooter contract. These are the clauses that you want to highlight to your second shooter and maybe even have them initial by prior to working for you. Your contract should first have a clause that discusses ownership of the images taken. This is usually in a copyright, intellectual property clause, or sometimes it's titled work made for hire clause. It is really clear cut. When a second shooter takes images on their camera, they automatically own copyright ownership over that image. But in a second shooter contract, you can say that those images are made under a work made for hire situation, whereby when they click that shutter, they are automatically assigning those copyright rights to your company. Next is an insurance and licenses clause. This type of clause ensures that your second shooter is an actual business and is licensed and also has their own insurance that they would give you a copy of. This is key because what happens if your second shooter has a malfunction with their camera or their SD card and all images are lost? Is that supposed to be on you? No, it's supposed to be on the second shooter. And this is why it's really important to hire professional second shooters. And the last one is a professional expectations clause. As a second shooter, what should they do when representing your company? You want to list all of that out in this very specific clause. Having these clauses not only puts your second shooter on notice of your expectations, but also protects you if the second shooter acts unprofessionally or, say, infringes on your work. Let me know in the comments if any of this has ever happened to you with a second shooter. Did you ever hire a family or friend and think nothing could ever go wrong? We all have the best of intentions. Then something did go wrong and you didn't have a contract to protect you? Type "that happened to me" down in the comments so that I know you can relate. As a wedding photographer, it's not only important to make sure that you're covered when hiring a second shooter. It's also important to ensure that you're covered with the clients that you're actually serving as well. The video here on your screen is going to walk you through how to do just that. In this video, I'm covering everything, such as cancellations, inclement weather situations, and even harassment. So you don't want to miss out on this one. Watch this video here on the screen.